As an export-oriented agricultural sector, South Africa must always pay attention to global developments and risks that could undercut its competitiveness in the world market. But one issue that doesn't always get full appreciation is the contribution of the agricultural input providers, various agrochemicals and seed breeding. The lack of public focus mainly stems from the fact that consumers and policymakers primarily monitor the end products, that's the harvest size, and animals, the health and expansion of herds. The Chief Economist of the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, Wandile Sihlobo, joins me now from Pretoria to discuss further. Wandile, it's such a pleasure to have you. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's such a great pleasure. Now, what's your take on cocoa prices making farming a more attractive occupational path than education in Cameroon?
You know, I'm always happy to see people coming into the agricultural sector, particularly in our continent. And when they come with the focus of thinking about the commercialization. So that's always a positive thing to do. But I must say, though, that as new entrant farmers look into the sector, looking to commercialize, they have also to remember that there are cycles on these commodities. Yes, now, cocoa prices are where they are because if you look at the production, global production is down 11% and the stocks are down and it's pushing up these price increases that you see. And I think in my reading of the situation that it will take some time for those stocks to actually recover. So there may be some bit of benefit in the near to medium term in here. But I do think that the new entrant farmers in the sector, they have to remember that there are cycles where these prices are not going to be high forever. They will come off from these levels that we're currently seeing now.
Right, so exciting development, but they have to approach with caution. Now, I'd like to pick your brain on cocoa price. And as we know, prices are set by the government in Ivory Coast and Ghana, but not in Cameroon and Nigeria. What is your view on price caps here?
You know, when you're looking at the price differential amongst these countries, as well as the policy approach, when prices are actually down, whenever we have a huge surplus, the government intervention where they set these minimum prices or price caps that they put in, that is with the intention of saying, look, we want to protect the farmer so that even when there is an oversupply in the market, at least they can cover a minimum of their input cost. But in times like this, as you just clearly demonstrated here, that Nigeria, Cameroon are seeing better prices than what you are seeing, for example, in Ivory Coast or in Ghana. Therefore, those farmers are losing out on this. My view looking into this, I would rather prefer more of the model that we see in Nigeria as well as we see in Cameroon, so that the farmer at least can get the benefit of the global increase in prices as it is now. Of course, then when the tide change, it means that the farmer has to manage better their input costs. But I think opening up the market and allowing farmers to interact with all of the market forces that are there, selling their commodity to the highest bidder is one of the most important thing. And I understand the fault on that argument, because if you are a small farmer, then in times of surplus, you might want to prefer what is happening in the likes of Ivory Coast.
Now, Wandile, I'm very sure that the Ivorian and Ghanaian farmers couldn't agree with you more. But now, when cocoa prices spike, we lament chocolate prices, which benefits European chocolate makers. Can Africa wrestle the chocolate mantle from the West? What do you think?
I think there it lies on us saying how much money as a continent do we have to actually put on developing the supply chain. We're talking now about the chocolate, but this is an argument that can be raised about a number of commodities, agricultural commodities and hard commodities, of saying what processing facilities do we put in place? And I think this is an important question and conversation to have, because as the continent of Africa, we're looking at our economies and we are asking a question of saying, hey, where are the sources of growth in our economy? And some in mining, some in agriculture, and the others, we say we can do a lot on this, but where the jobs can actually be created is more on the value add part. And I think in that part of the industrial or the value chain, we haven't seen enough investment on that. And I think that's something that we have to do. I must be quick, though, to caution to say when we are thinking about developing our value chains, it wouldn't necessarily be saying we want to eliminate Europe or anything. There could be coexistence, but I think investment on adding more value domestically it is only good, especially as a continent. We are sitting with young people that are unemployed. And we all know from evidence that within the value chain, there could be much more better jobs that could be created than what we're currently seeing in the farming side. So this is all a call to say, let's look at our supply chain in a number of commodities, including the cocoa, and really search for areas at which the private sector, the governments can actually think of ways of increasing their investments and developing these value chains in the African continent.
All right, that's a very robust outlook on it. Now, you've written an article on the importance of seed breeding in South Africa. Are there no adverse effects to genetically modifying seeds?
As best as we can tell in South Africa, I mean, you and I know that South Africa have been planting genetically modified seed on maize, on soybeans, cotton since about early 2000. In fact, on maize, the first crop was in year 2000 that was planted. Right now, 80% of South African maize is genetically modified. 95% of soybeans is genetically modified. And you look across the world, the likes of the US, South Americans, and many other countries are producing on this. We don't see the health effects on this. And I guess this is one of the things that I usually fight with some of the fellow Africans in the continent to say, look, guys, if we are looking into Africa and we want to increase agricultural production, we need to actually embrace the technological benefit that we see. Because some of these seeds, they give us better yields, they reduce the need for herbicides and pesticides, and they also are able to adapt well in some of these challenging climatic conditions that we are seeing. I mean, a point in case you look at, again, in South Africa, take maize. If you look at the maize yield in South Africa today, it is around about 6 tons per hectare. You compare that with what we see in Nigeria, with what we see in Zimbabwe, what we see in Malawi, you'll find that the maize yield on average on dry land in some of these countries I've just mentioned, it's around about 1.5 tons per hectare. Now, Nigeria plants almost twice the area of maize that South Africa produces, but in terms of volume, we're not getting as much. And I think that's where the problem is. And lastly on this, even if we were to say we are worried about climate change, one of the great difficulties that one has observed is that from the early 2000s up until today, if you take out South Africa and perhaps maybe Zambia, and you look at the sub-Saharan Africa region, much of the improvement that we have seen in grain production has been about tilling more land instead of improvement in yields and productivity. And part of the shortcoming, I think it's on this issue of embracing better seeds. Now, an argument on that has to be made for smallholder farmers, because people can say, look, we can embrace these bigger seeds, but where will farmers be getting the money to buy seeds year in, year out? And I think those are the policy questions we have to grapple with. But let us embrace science to improve agricultural productivity in Africa.
Right, I'm so glad you talk about the role of technology and mechanized farming, and of course smallholder farmers in terms of subsistence farming and how much education that is required to sort of boost this area. But that's a conversation we're going to have on another day. It's an entire completely different conversation. But in wrapping up, I just want to ask you, how important would you say the export market is to South Africa's agricultural sector?
Export markets to South Africa's agricultural sector is everything. Because if you look at South Africa today, the country exports about half of what it produces in agriculture. That's in value terms in 2023 was about $13.2 billion at a record level. So that also then means that South Africa has to be careful about its approach to geopolitics, because some of the export markets that are in, we cannot afford to lose for these products that we plant. But at the same time, it does mean that South Africa has a lot of problems in its ports that it needs to resolve, in its logistics system. And I know that there are many plans that are being put in place to do that and resolving those things. So it is an export-oriented agricultural economy, and the international markets are everything. And lastly here, I mean, if you look at where though these exports are going, which is what warms my heart, is the fact that 40% of South Africa's agricultural exports are to the African continent. So there's a lot more trading within the continent. And of course, you do have significant volumes that goes to Asia, to Europe, the Middle East, and the other parts of the world.
All right. Wandile, such an insightful conversation. Many thanks for joining us today on the Global Business Report, and we'll speak to you again very soon.